Right, everybody. I hope we're all back from tea and lots of debate. Now we're going to rev the gears up a little bit more and get into some also more serious debate, I hope. So in this session, we're going to be talking about the just energy transition. And obviously, that's a thorny issue in itself. So we want to open the space and have it as a safe space, so that those online and those in this room can feel safe enough to raise issues that are maybe contentious, but the contradictions are often where the breakthroughs happen. So let me hand over to our first speaker, Jessica Bowman from UP. She's going to give us her view, and then we'll have Emmanuel Sule from Tanzania. He'll be coming in online, and then Boniface Dulani. And unfortunately, I can't give you the grace that I gave myself when I gave my presentation. So I'm going to be a real dictator and say sorry, because I've been told that I must give you only 5 minutes. But I'll sneak it in if I can. Okay, so please go for it if you want.
Thank you, Colleen, and good morning, everyone. And since we have the ambassador here, I always say all protocols observed and all of that. Yeah. So I'm Jessica Bowman. Also officially new at UP, even though I've been at UP for almost 15 years, but officially appointed as a permanent staff in the Department of Economics as senior lecturer. I also wear the hat as the deputy chair of SACHI on the just energy transition. So at SACHI, in a sense, is almost like a research consortium. So we were granted the one on the just energy transition. So as you can imagine, we work a lot on that environment now. So most of my research is dedicated to the just energy transition. And it was an eye-opener when we got the chair of how wide the JET discussions go. So we had opportunities to open for PhD students and for postdoctoral students, and that's when you start getting now people from engineering, from geography, not only us the economists working on that. So having said that, when Manu gave me like full open book, talk about anything on the just energy transition, that is difficult, Manu. How do you do that? And you want me to do it in 5 minutes? So what is JET? Is basically moving to a low carbon economy towards more renewable energy, but in the case of South Africa and many African countries, we have to do it in a fair, inclusive, and societal, equitable way. So I'm doing a bit of work with Europe at the moment, and I thought I'd bring, because we always get the question, but does Europe has a transition? How does it compare to South Africa, for example? Yes, I think we just removed that just of the energy transition, but globally there's an energy transition. So when I try to say, okay, what is the main comparisons between the two? So I could get to the European Union is focused on building, renovation, and reskilling. Because they have an aging industrial region and they have energy poverty, believe it or not. So when you talk about, so Visel, who is our student under the chair, she works a lot with us on energy poverty. And it's always that question of, well, why does Europe talk about energy poverty? But there is energy poverty, there's affordability issues. And we saw that in the peak of the Russian-Ukraine war, when gas infrastructures went suddenly bombed, and how that affected gas prices in Europe and the repercussions for energy poverty. And then at the South Africa, with the South African background, we have to work on poverty elevation and, as we mentioned before, the grid access. And we are facing this on the back of high unemployment and high reliance on coal, as we know. So there's differences, but there's still the fact that there is an energy transition. So given the title of this session, that is Energy Sovereignty, Just Transitions, and Citizens' View, I had 5 points sort of to make that we can discuss properly as the roundtable if it allows to. So we have the sovereignty paradox. So the problem is that energy sovereignty is often discussed as a technical goal. So owning the grid, who develops the grid, etc. But in reality, it's all about these policies, like who implements the policy, who creates the policies that will allow for this transition. So Africa is navigating a transition that is being, as we discussed before, under this geopolitical fragmentation that we're living globally. So policies like the EU CBAM, they are climate-driven, but create institutional inequality by forcing African exports to meet northern standards. So that's only one of the many examples that we could give. So a transition couldn't be called just if the speed and the terms are dictated by global capital timelines rather than local developmental needs. How many minutes do I have?
You can keep going.
Okay, so then me being an economist, I had to bring sort of like a lot of our research focus on these macro level evaluations of the just energy transition in South Africa. But the more we did this macro level, we realized, well, the energy transition, especially when you focus in South Africa, is not a national problem only. You need to look at it at a provincial problem. So, for example, if we're moving out of coal, we're transitioning away from coal, which we have to do, I'm completely on for that. But we have one province in South Africa, in Mpumalanga, where all the coal is concentrated there. 90% of our power plants, coal power plants, are there. So if you shut down coal production, coal electricity production in Mpumalanga, what's going to happen to the citizens in that area? So that's why we need to hear the voices of those local members and take them into consideration. Then we do a lot of work on the green economy, and a bit tied down to what we spoke today. Whose knowledge counts? We cannot continue working in silos. It cannot be academia and the private sector and governments. As we say, we need to listen to our students. We need to listen to the youth, etc. So there are green actors. So one to highlight is the informal sector that is there in South Africa, is doing great jobs, sometimes being seen as small, like the waste pickers and the recyclers. But they are driving this transition. Then we have a big issue with the skills and the gender dimension. So there's a transition gap. So the skills that we have with these all coal-based skills, but we need this green tech. So how do we help the people, for example, in Mpumalanga, transition and be employable in other sectors? And then gender. So we did a paper that a lot of the green jobs, or what I classify as green jobs, which surprisingly enough, our Statistics South Africa Bureau is not collecting data on green jobs. So we have to go and classify them. And a lot of those green jobs are focused on males. So what's happening to the females? We're widening that gap instead of like making it smaller. So I think 3 pillars that we need to concentrate on is policy coherence. So we cannot separate trade policies from social protection and social implications. As I mentioned, data. We must move beyond just this crisis framing, and we need to look more at provinces, households, how are they affected by this energy transition? And African states must negotiate for the fiscal space to subsidize the transition for the citizens. So just my closing statement. Energy sovereignty is a right of African citizens to be the primary beneficiaries of a new industrial area, not just the recipients of a global climate mandate. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Fabulous. Sure. It's amazing what one can cover in 5 minutes. I'm sure my students would be saying, why don't you just give us 5-minute lectures? So we heard a lot of stuff there, and we'll pick up on it later. But I think you really brought in some sectors that are not often even counted officially, gender not counted officially, etc. But we'll come back to that. So thank you very, very much. Okay, now we turn to the second on the program, and I think he's online, is Emmanuel Sule from Tanzania. Emmanuel, you are there. Sorry, I have my back to you. So Emmanuel, if you could please just introduce yourself and then take it away. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. So my name is Emmanuel Sule, and I always go with Sule because there's so many Emmanuels in Tanzania. So thanks for the opportunity. I really enjoyed this session because I had a privilege of really studying energy and climate in my master's in public policy. So it's going home. And I must declare that I'm also now working on a project called Buying In, Buying Out in Green Transition Investments in Tanzania with colleagues at the University of Dodoma and Roskilde in Denmark. So this is really great. And I want to start with a very simple and important premise, I think. In these discussions, I can agree that we don't need to debate whether Africa needs energy sovereignty. That question is settled. But the real question that we really need to grapple with is how do African states set their energy priorities to actually achieve energy sovereignty? This is where we need to deliberate. This is where we need to create evidence based decision making, which we need to ground into cost benefit analysis across both generations, the current and future. That's all about sustainable development. And that's how we should be accountable to the decisions that we make today as policymakers and also as academic when we become silent on things that matter most. So starting with my first really starting point is then rethinking what energy sovereignty really means in our countries. In many circumstances, we always frame this sovereignty narrowly, just as a freedom to choose where our energy sources should be, and nobody should discuss that. But that's not an issue because that's not even a solution to what we need to achieve. What we need to really discuss is how do we control the technology that will bring us to the sovereignty, building the infrastructure that we need, and finance them. In that sense, then if we don't have all these technology, infrastructure, and financial system in place, then our sovereignty continue to be incomplete. We know that Africa is rich in resources, rich in solar, rich in geothermal. Countries like Tanzania, we haven't even touched a single geothermal to produce our energy. But our neighbor, whom we share, the Rift Valley, Kenya, is a powerhouse of geothermal. So what we lack in my analysis is a system sovereignty on how to achieve that. Secondly, I think we really need to really grapple with the question that even the previous speaker and other previous speakers spoke about. Energy for whom, by whom, and at what cost? And you can add as for whose benefit. Because today we all see that all the countries are coming with the strategies to secure their access to critical minerals that are critical for green transition investment, electric cars and all this stuff. But these extractive minerals are causing havoc in communities like in Eastern DRC. That is what cost means, and that's where we need to get back. But we also see large-scale investment in wind, in solar, displacing communities. And what really makes me think twice, if you study all the green investment, green economy my previous speaker spoke about, it is all about business as usual models, not only extractive, but displacing communities, dispossessions. So when it comes to solar, when it comes to winds, communities get displaced, benefits are externalized, and value chains remain controlled externally. So even what you call as green economy, green transitions, all continue to reproduce old inequalities. That is business as usual. So my third point then become moving beyond the extractive models and really put efforts into meaningful participation and ownership of these investments by the people. So that is where you make communities not just the beneficiaries of the corporate social responsibilities, but they become co-owners, co-investors, and decision makers. And this is what we are trying to look at when we call this project buying in, buying out in green transition investment. Simply, when you achieve buy-in, that means communities are not displaced when the solar farm is established in central Tanzania, for example. But if your investment is buying out, that means you perpetuate the old model where in African continent, where minerals are discovered, people immediately feel that they are cursed because they are displaced. Because in African continent, in many countries, you don't own anything beneath your land. The minerals are state property. So everything else that you use is on the surface of the land. So this one brings to the old debates, and my good friend Isa Shivji, a scholar in Tanzania who's highly respected, say that it is time to expand the definition of land. For those who critique the land reforms on surface in Zimbabwe, for example, it's not effective, but actually it gives people what they call a full container ownership. They not only own the service, but also minerals. I haven't done much of the research there, but I think something really needs to be looked at. I have only two more points that I want to just run through. But I think African scholars, ourselves here and many others, really need to invest on the structural constraint that we touched on. We need to confront them. Because as we speak, there are over 60 million people who still lack access to electricity. I just pointed out that even my rural home doesn't have electricity, but I survive on solar. So these major investments need to happen with internal funds, but all of these at the moment are happening through external financing and imported technology. So it's time for our universities to look back and say, what can we do to produce experts that could address a very fundamental question that are resting in our houses? Africa has resources, and what we really do not have is a full control over the systems that convert these resources into accessible energy, like solar, folks, like wind. Then my final point, and then I conclude, is really the role of African intellectuals and policy communities. This begins or brings me to my real final point. It's not enough for us today and intellectuals to just raise concerns. We must also offer concrete pathways. I agree with Iso Shivji again. I remember we debated a lot at Plus in Cape Town that sometimes even critiquing is enough as a scholar. You have done your job. But sometimes they always come back, give us a solutions. So we need to internalize what the just energy transition means in a context like South Africa, Tanzania, Congo, and so forth, and then design locally anchored investment models. How to avoid rushed transitions that reproduces dependency under a green label. Let's take a simple example. In Tanzania, Vodacom, which has its roots in South Africa and UK, and other companies are putting mobile towers in schools or in residential places where people earn rent. They are not displaced. So it creates a sustainable income or source of income to these communities. This could happen for solar. This could happen for wind energy. I think there are countries in Europe that are just using that model where people are buying into this model and they're not displaced. I am winding it up for a few seconds. So Africa today, I could conclude that is resource rich, but what we lack is to own that system, control it, and make it work for ourselves. So pathway, therefore, for us lies in aligning energy investment with long-term development goals. We should stop making our investment goals based on our five years manifestos of our ruling parties or political parties. We really have to dedicate. I think South Africa has this development program or something, but really, how does that? And then really invest in technology and financing it. Then, lastly, we really need to ensure that the energy system that we build is built with our people, not just for them, so that they can actually make selections that works. Then you go back to say, but do the people have that knowledge that they need to make the decisions? That goes back to our teaching system. What are we teaching people to become? So finally, I think we need to have a really economic transformation, social justice, and genuine autonomy of our economies. Thank you so much.
Very, very, very much. Thank you. So a couple of points that you've made, which I think we should carry over into our discussion. This notion of system sovereignty, I think, is really great. So thank you for that. I'd also like to, at some point, talk about a special UNEP report that some of us internationally are now writing on overshoot, which addresses directly the 5-year time frame into much more about energy plateauing and declining way into the future and what it means. But let me not hog the show. So our last speaker is Boniface Dulani from Malawi. So please come through, Boniface. And Emmanuel, thank you for also being on the line and staying there. So Boniface, as they say in the music industry, take it away.
Thank you, and good morning, colleagues. And thank you for inviting me to just share some experiences from the voices of African citizens on issues to do with sustainable development, but I'll be looking at this from the perspectives of African citizens, I think, on climate change. And I'll be focusing on just four quick points. I think firstly, I'll be looking at awareness, popular awareness and understanding of climate change in Africa, and then citizen experiences of climate change. Thirdly, adapting to climate change. And lastly, but by no means least, and maybe speaking directly to the theme of this workshop, support for climate mitigation and action from ordinary African citizens. And I would be drawing from recent survey data from Afrobarometer, starting with the popular awareness of climate change. Looking at surveys done in almost 40 countries over the last 2 years, we see that more than half of citizens on the continent, about 56% to be precise, express awareness or have said that they have heard of climate change. And we see that the awareness of climate change tends to be highest in countries like Seychelles and Mauritius, that are island nations. So perhaps, presumably, I think the actual experiences that these island nations are experiencing does inform, I think, their level of awareness of climate change. But the climate change awareness is also higher among men and urban residents, and it tends to increase also with wealth, education, and news consumption. So these seem to be key drivers to explain awareness of climate change. Among the least, knowledgeable countries, including Nigeria, where only 27% say that they've heard or are aware of climate change. Mauritania, where only 31% say that they are aware of climate change. And my brother Emmanuel from Tanzania as well, just about 1/3 of Tanzanians express awareness of climate change at 38%. In terms of what kind of experiences, do people associate and attribute to climate change? So how are people on the continent experiencing climate change? I think the topmost, experience relates to droughts and climate crop failure as the most, experienced forms of climate threats, with about half of the respondents saying, reporting, on these events and saying that they've become somewhat or more, much more severe in recent years. Looking at adapting to climate change, we see that about 3 in 10 citizens say that they, that in response to changing weather patterns, they or their families have had to alter their, water consumption, and then also, changing and altering outdoor work patterns, and also crop planting. So in short, I think we're seeing that the citizens are finding ways of adapting to climate change, and that there are, a number of options that people are looking at. And this also includes changes, I think, in the patterns of livestock rearing, and in some cases about 1/5 of citizens saying that they've had to relocate as a result of climate change. And then, what is, I think, perhaps more concerning is that climate change is affecting, again, mostly rural and poorer, as well as less educated respondents. So they are the ones that also are having to bear the cost of adapting to climate change, including having to move and change their livelihood strategies. But coming into the last point on supporting for climate mitigation and action, specifically asking whether citizens see a role for themselves in undertaking action that would mitigate the impact of climate change. So among citizens on the continent that express awareness of climate change, they do place primary responsibility for addressing climate change to their own, firstly, their own governments, and secondly, to developed nations. But more importantly, about 1 in 5 citizens tell us that actually ordinary citizens themselves should take the primary responsibility for fighting climate change. And there's also, I think, a strong support for government action through infrastructure developments, infrastructure investments, as well as I think that pressure should be placed on wealthy nations for climate aid. So about 3/4, 78% of Africans say that actually, wealthy nations should also invest more and assist African citizens to fight climate change. And I think some of the actions, for example, is to look at alternatives to using charcoal or fuel wood. So, there's also strong to moderate support for banning tree cutting, for example, for fuel, with more than just about half of citizens saying we should place a ban on this, and also making mandatory usage of cleaner cook stoves. So in short and in summary, there is, I think, awareness and willingness for among African citizens to embrace, I think, new measures that would include using sustainable energy, cleaner energy, so that they themselves can play a role in fighting climate change. But that in order for them to do so, they do expect support from their governments as well as from wealthy nations, so that they can be enabled to play their role in fighting climate change. So I want to stop there and hand over back to the moderator. Thank you so much.
Thanks very, very much. I just wanted to check with the big boss, how much time do we have on this session? Yes. Okay. Oh, wow. Lots of time. Oh, great. You shouldn't say that, because we will fill it. Okay, so as moderator, I'm going to use that hat just to get a little bit more time to the presenters to fill in a little bit on what they shared with us, and then we'll open it up to the floor, if that's okay with everybody. So I wondered if I could ask our first presenter, Jessica, you mentioned the issue of, the European Union and how they're also having to think about energy transitions. We're not alone in this big issue. But I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about the reskilling and how that's looking in the green transition, and especially in Mpumalanga. And I think it almost makes a nice loop back to the youth. There's an incentive for young people to get engaged. They're not just going to go rah-rah on the street, or hopefully not, become too vigorous. But ultimately the reskilling, so that they also then become not only the victims and, looking for livelihoods, but actually have agency. Their agency is increased. So I wonder if you could come in and just talk about that a little bit, and then anybody else who wants to add in on that. Thanks, Jessica.
Yeah. The reskilling. So many points to touch on reskilling. Is our youth prepared? Are we prepared? Etc. So one thing to think about, and I think I mentioned it a bit. Green jobs are there. And we had a discussion the other day. We have another project that is looking specifically how we're teaching energy, from energy economics, from energy transitions, etc. at the university level. How does it link to the TVET? And a lot of the things that we see is green jobs are not necessarily new jobs. Are jobs that are available at different industries that we're used to. So I think a lot of the focus in the teaching and in the promoting these green jobs is making people aware of it's not something completely new. It's something that does exist. And sometimes we say, does it have just a different name? So now, for example, waste pickers, they used to be waste pickers, but now they are associated with the green jobs because they are collecting the plastic and taking it to the recycling spots. So I think a lot of what we need to do as a university, if I want to talk to academia, and as government needs to do, is try to find what is the language that we're using to make people aware. And in South Africa, my other hat is working a lot of youth employment, and then I try to bring these green skillings, etc. Guys, we have 50% of our youth is unemployed. And sometimes from studies that we've done, is a lot to do with information. They are not being informed of what the job market wants. We are not teaching them at schools to be ready for, not, never mind the job market, to be ready to what to study, to be employable in the future. So I'm not saying it's the only solution, but one of the things we need to learn to do is this repackaging. To make communities aware of, like an Mpumalanga community, make them aware, yes, we're closing the coal power stations, but there are policies out there that are trying to absorb these people, trying to help these people to be skilled and to enter this sort of like, we have a center for the future of work, this future of work environment that is opening up. So what I'm trying to say, not everything is lost, but we do need to be more active in how we package things around.
Okay.
I hope that sort of answers.
That's
Yeah.
great. Thank you. So I'm not going to let us all go after that, because then it might be we might go down a hole there. And it's a very important hole, but I think I'm going to let the other panelists also make an input, and then we'll open it up wider. But lovely. Thank you very, very much for those very provocative statements. Emmanuel, turning to you, I wondered if you could put your face screen on again. Thank you so much, Emmanuel. So Emmanuel, you mentioned a really interesting point that I've never really thought about a lot, and I'm sure some in the room haven't either. This whole notion of a systems sovereignty. Could you elaborate on that? And speaking to what you said, what are some of the solutions you think you could bring to policymakers, either at national, international, or local level? People have been trying to do system stuff, but it tends to kind of be still in the hard sciences, etc. And so I want you to link, I'm going to make it a bit tougher. Where does AI fit in as well? Because AI seems to be the super bot or whatever that's going to come in and help us to really get this thing moving. So hopefully you can talk about system sovereignty and also the role of technology, but in particular AI, and maybe where Africa fits in there. Sorry, just 3 simple little questions before lunch. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I think AI is something that I'm learning late, so I won't say much about it, but I will speak about the system. And I will start with an example. This week, there have been a lot of discussion in Tanzania, Uganda, and Kenya, because the African rich man, Dangote, was in Kenya and Uganda talking about building a refinery in Tanga, Tanzania, to end the energy dependency in these countries, but also utilize the resources in these countries. And he was very clear, and he said, folks, I'm not going to put a penny in any of these countries if you cannot guarantee me that my investment will not go through what I went through in Nigeria. That you put all the changes every time. That's system thinking, systematic changes that needs to happen from the minds of politicians to the people, that we have energy. Let me give you another random example. Yesterday, I was sitting with my old schoolmate, high school friend, Emmanuel Tarimo. I'm Emmanuel Sule. That's how we ended up saying we use our surnames. And we just discussed about taxes. And he gave an example of someone importing motorbikes that are electric based. But this guy paid 4 times taxes than the motorbikes that uses petrol, because our tax officers feel the guys that are importing those that are fuel dependent generate sustainable tax for them because they keep buying petrol. So this is system thinking. If you go to Tanzania, in 2012, I wrote an op-ed saying a smart choices for developing Tanzanian gas industry. Since then, we have discovered trillions of natural gas, but to date, we are not using the same gas sufficiently, and we are stuck with this energy dependency. So that is system thinking. Like, how does the country decide that we have a resource that will cut? Because the estimates that we have in Tanzania, the price of natural gas that is produced in Tanzania, if it's used for cars, is only 10% of what we are using now to buy petrol. That is system thinking, that is system change. And it involves a lot of system. tax people, policymakers, people demanding change, but also delinking from the global system that keep us in the same. If you go back to why Nigeria couldn't build its refinery, it's because they were not allowed by those who trade with them. I think Dangote has said that many times. I don't have to repeat. So that's the system I'm thinking about. But AI, maybe in a nutshell, just give us access to some of the latest approaches that we can use to fast track our system thinking. But then you go back to the fundamental question: who owns the AI? Who is feeding them? It is even more energy dependent. That's what I'm told and what I'm reading. And then it's actually depriving us of the same critical mineral resources that we are not ready. I think we just need to behave like the Namibian president who fired a minister and said, I'm taking control of this minerals ministry so that these minerals could benefit our own people. What's the benefit of having uranium that does not provide energy to Namibians, but also provide just the same energy to the other folks? Then the same guys who say this is a dark continent. So I think we really need to think and be provocative on our decisions because we know what we're speaking about and evidence is there 60 years back of our independence in countries like my own.
Very, very much. Thank you. As you were going along, I kind of, and I really am not saying this in a disparaging way, but I was thinking around governance, and it seems like we also need, I don't know, systems magicians, but we do need people who can help us to link all these issues that you're talking about with some of the governance requirements at multiple scales. So thank you for that. Boniface, I hope you're still with us. Boniface, so Malawi is a wonderful country, and there's a lot of climate work going on in Malawi. There are many funders who are funding Malawi. And so I just want to ask, because I work in climate change, and I actually work with people who work in Malawi, and I just wondered if you could tell us, as Malawians who are sitting as we come in to help in very well-meaning ways, the meteorological organizations, your civic society groups, your women gender groups, your food security groups. You know, we've been doing a lot together with the Malawians. But what are some of the things you feel we're not really covering? We do have the Norwegian ambassador here in the room. The Norwegian funders have been also funding. Can you maybe provide, and it's hard for you maybe to provide this, but speaking from your heart, possibly, you've seen lots of cars coming in, right? Lots of aid agencies doing the similar things. What's the barriers to adaptation? All well-meaning. But what do you think we're missing in light of the sustainability discussions we're trying to talk about here today? Thanks, Bonnie.
Thank you. Indeed, I think there's been quite a lot done in the area of sustainable livelihoods, climate change, you name it, in Malawi. And I'm sure it's not only Malawi, but other countries on the continent as well. I was listening, I think, quite carefully and closely to the introductory remarks by the ambassador earlier on. And I think when she mentioned the issue of green energy, and I think the debates on whether to embrace, with African countries requesting, to use coal, for example, build coal plants for energy generation, and of course the debates against that. In a country like Malawi, where less than 20% of households are connected to the electricity grid, it's a debate that I think is quite lively and ongoing. That when you are faced with the challenges of generating sufficient power, should we then be saying that, okay, let's not invest, let's not utilize the resources that are available, like coal, to generate more power so that we can connect more households to the electricity grid? Or do we then wait for the clean air when we also don't have the resources to invest in that in the technology ourselves. And of course, I mean, some of it, if you're looking at using gas, for example, in place of fuel wood or charcoal, among others, I mean, solar power that Emmanuel alluded to. These are really quite expensive for the ordinary woman and the ordinary Malawian man out there. So the trade-off really is something that's really problematic, and something that I think maybe is not really taken into consideration in discussions like the ones that we are having. And then again, my colleague and brother Dan Banik, Professor Banik is very familiar and aware with Malawi. We've worked together on a project for charcoal, which is really a main source of livelihoods for many ordinary Malawians, including some that have graduated from high school. But because of the limited job opportunities, a lot of people venture into these areas, into selling charcoal, contributing, I think, to environmental degradation. But then it's also because they have no alternative. So in short, maybe the question that we haven't been dealing with is, what are the alternatives? How can we incentivize ordinary Malawians and indeed other African citizens in a similar situation to move away from from the current, from basically, utilizing fossil fuels in favor of much more greener energy. Again, I've spent time with Professor Banik in Oslo, and I'm always amazed how many electric vehicles are on the roads of Oslo. And then we think about Malawi, even if they were, those vehicles were affordable, which they are not for the average Malawian, where are they going to be powered when the electricity is not reliable? So we might end up with a lot of those cars really parked at homes or not fully charged, and they end up running out of power in the middle of the road. So there are, I think, these kind of challenges that need to be addressed, and that's why in the survey data that I shared earlier, many citizens are saying we are willing to play a role in fighting climate change, mitigating against climate change, but we do need support for us to be able to do so. And I think that's the part, if you ask me, of the discussion that maybe is not being talked about enough.
Thank you very, very, very much. So, gosh, quite a lot to talk about. Just to carry some threads through before I open it to the room, and please, for the people who are present here, to address some questions that they might have for you as well as the panel. So the issue of system sovereignty, the issue of some of the concerns around skilling, etc., etc. Before we left for tea, we had inputs saying we need to form alliances. So maybe we could have something like citizens' assemblies, I don't know, some way to bring the voices of citizens in so that it's not only at high levels where we all rush off and increase our carbon footprint. And then, Boniface, your concerns about the basic real conditions of service delivery, equity, just having a life in this very, very changing world. But I've had enough say now, so I'm going to have a roving mic. I think before we start going into this debate, I know Noreen did have a question before tea, and she said she'll fold it in somewhere at the appropriate time. So I can see her going, not now, so when it becomes appropriate. So anyone want to ask the panel, or I think let's ask the panel first. We've got quite a lot of time still. So let's ask the panel first, and then we can allow them to respond. So I see you've got a mic. Please go for it.
Thank you so much. My name is Tatsan Ngwana. I'm from here at Future Africa under the One Health challenge domain. My question is for Jessica regarding green jobs for youth. So the situation in South Africa is that we have a lot of these TVET colleges, the training and vocational education. Yeah, the training and vocational education centers. I think each municipal district has one of their own. And each of them is producing a lot of graduates on paper. And I think there is a mismatch between the quality of the graduate needed to be absorbed by industry and meeting the industry standards, and also what the training colleges the standards that they are meeting based on the requirements of the Department of Higher Education, which they answer to. So it seems like the department just wants to meet a set target number of graduates, but then industry has certain standards that are not being met by the quality of graduates being produced. Hence, when these graduates enter into the workspace, there is now a gap for certain skills to be upgraded in these graduates. And now government has to come in again and sponsor this skills gap. And it just creates another problem now that requires more money. And another space, you alluded to corruption earlier on, where comrades now, South Africans can relate to that term, can start coming in and looting funds that are now directed to satisfying these skills. So it seems like we are fighting a never-ending war on this. So can you comment on that?
Okay. So let you hold the mic. I think I'm going to get two other questions, because I hope it's also going to be for the rest of the panel, and then you're welcome to come in. So, who has a? Both of you. Oh, you have a question. Right.
Okay, greetings everyone. I'm Lamek Achena, a PhD student at the University of Cape Town. It's a pleasure to be in this room discussing where people are discussing critical things about Africa. So my question is linked to Jessica in terms of this transition. I'm finding the similarities between the just energy transition to some previous policies, like the economic adjustment policies that were done previously in Africa, where African countries were just given a template on implementing certain economic policies. Like the same applies to these just energy transition policies. So the SAPs, we really know what they did to the people and what happened in terms of gender inequalities, labor issues that happened thereafter. What is being done currently in terms of trying to reduce the inequalities that are emanating from the just energy transitions policies, the frameworks that are being implemented in South Africa? That's my question to you.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Claire, and I work here at Future Africa with Prof. Mano. So, okay, my comment or question goes to Prof. Sule. So we are saying we do not need to speak whether countries need to move towards cleaner energies. That is quite clear. So my issue is to move towards just energy. We need resources and critical minerals, and we all know where that is coming from. So that's where I highlight the inequalities or the asymmetries between the global south and the global north, because the extraction happens in global south and high consumption happens in the global north. So my question is, in fact, what I want to say is Africa, we have our own development priorities. We need industrialization, we need to move towards industrialization, employment creation, and also infrastructure. So my question is, how can Africa benefit from this global demand of resources or critical minerals without perpetuating or repeating unsustainable extractive, patterns, so that we can benefit as Africa, and also we can place ourselves, strategically on the global discussions? on energy. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to allow a couple from this side, and then we're going to ask people to respond. So we're going to do the full circle, and then, so there you
Thank you. My question is directed to Jessica. Sorry. So, but let me give context first. You made mention of a skills mismatch. That, okay, let me start by saying that we know for a fact that just energy transition, one of the critical pillars of it will be skills. And we need to localize skills to ensure that there is even distribution of access to opportunities, both from low, medium, and high-level skills. And high-level skills are quite a complexity because of what my brother said in terms of actually the mismatch of skills in TVETs and other things. I did a bit of research. 23-24 financial years, CETAs have spent over 17 billion annually for skills development across all universities. 22-23 financial year, 16.6 billion. On average, in the last five financial years, it's 75 to 80 billion rands. We still have a mismatch. The Minister of Higher Education obviously does make mention of the mismatch, especially engineering skills. But this is my issue. Sector skills plans, which are developed by higher education through its entities and its subsectors, whether it's agriculture skills, whether it's engineering skills, whether it's health skills, for all the 21 CETAs, this is the money that they spend. But there's a process before they spend money. It's called sector skills committees, where industry, where higher education, where communities, where investors, private sector actually sit and actually determine the type of skills needs in the subsequent financial year, and which will be the basis upon which funding will be prioritized. But my question then is, what measures can be introduced in the face of the fact that the recognition that how do we improve coordination between private sector, between industry, higher education, TVETs, and also the potential investors in the subsectors, especially of engineering, considering that if one is to argue, is that it looks like the money is not a problem here. Thank you.
Okay, I think I just want to bring, so my question is for Prof. Boniface. So I just want to bring back the issue of the citizens, because we use a lot of the data from Barometer, and we look at we sort of see that there's a high percentage of people that are aware of climate change, but then we are still not getting an activated citizenry. So I think part of what we also need to do is we need to ask different questions, because it's also about how that awareness translates into action, because that's going to speak about people's buy-in for energy transition, so that we can mobilize the state, so that we can get proper social mobilization. So my question would be, should we ask how we activate an environmentally conscious citizenry, because then we make the right decisions, and we need to understand that awareness can either translate into an activation or an anxiety. And that, your statement this morning about whether we have the oxygen to talk about these things, because it starts there, because then we mobilize upwards. And so we need to be conscious about how citizenry responds and what they do. And my question, Bonnie, would be, you are there at the Afrobarometer, and you have scientists here in South Africa, and we sort of want to see if you guys can maybe also help us understand a little bit about how awareness can be better translated into activation.
This is for my good friend, the Paramount Chief, the tall man from Zomba, Boniface Dulani. And a very simple question for you, Boni, and that has to do with what Norway has been doing in South Africa. There's a company called Scatec Solar that has made major investments for solar panels, renewable energy in the Western Cape. And given that we, in beloved Malawi, are suffering from lack of electricity, what would it take for the government to be able to attract major private sector actors in the renewable energy field? And one issue that I've been wondering about has to do with whether the Malawian domestic market can afford to pay the kind of prices that perhaps renewable energy requires. So can one make Malawi an attractive destination for that kind of private sector investments in renewable energy? Thank you.
So, wow, what a set of questions. Hope we don't get indigestion as before lunch. So I'm going to just go around the room again for the people to answer who the questions were directed to. I think you've all got a list of those of you online, and then those of you in the room. So Jessica, over to you.
Thank you for all the very interesting questions. And I mean, as I said, the just energy transition is such a complicated, intrinsic, multidisciplinary concept that we could have a whole roundtable on green jobs and skills mismatch. But just going back to the question on the green jobs for youth and this skill mismatch, I mean, I completely agree with you. And I always make a comment that is not very well received sometimes, that we have an issue in South Africa. So I did my bachelor studies in Australia, where the equivalent to TVETs are super well developed. They are on top of what are the skills that are needed in the market. And sometimes you see that graduates from TVETs earn much more than what a graduate from the university will earn just by doing a 2-year TVET. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I think that's a shift that we need to do back in South Africa. At some point, we have the shift, the mindset of if you do not have a university education, you're no one. If you don't have a university education, you cannot get a job. And that's where the TVETs fell sort of like off and behind. And now we're trying to play that catch-up of, okay, what is the role of a TVET? What should they be teaching? So I think we need to bring back that perception, and it's a social perception, understandable given the very complex South African background of if you don't have a university degree, you're not going to get a job. And the TVETs are sort of like looked down, and it's sort of like the last place that the people that doesn't have the mathematics literacy, etc., or doesn't get a job, a space to study the university falls into. And I don't think we should look down to TVETs. I don't think everyone needs to have a master's. Not everyone has to have a PhD. We all need to have, we are all different. We cannot have different sets of skills. So I think that's what sort of like the first point that we need to do. And we have the project that I mentioned that we're trying to see on the education. How do we, obviously focusing on the just energy transition. And we had that discussion with the CITAs of the graduates from TVETs and the graduates from university have very different sets of skills. So universities is still very theory focused, not a lot of practice involved in it. And the TVETs is the opposite. Practice from the beginning, practical skills, but not the theory focus. So in a sense, we also need to try and find this sort of like bridging gap where we as pure academics go to a TVET and even in a 1-week course teach theory behind the practice, and where we in academia expose our students to the practice. So I gave the example of the type of economic modeling that I use. It tells me sometimes, no, we can move everything to solar. And then you go to the engineers and say, no, but it's not possible. But as an economist, this is what the model is telling me. Employment will be better, GDP is better, but we don't have that practical skills. And that's where it goes back to the comments that we have mentioned and heard today of the transdisciplinarity, and we need to break these silos. We cannot continue working on this. I just work as an economist, you just work as an engineer, etc. So, I mean, very long-winded answer, but it's a very complex issue that doesn't have a one-size-fits-all. And then if I can go, it relates to your skills mismatch and the CITAs. Yeah, I always get also like, no, there's no money, but then you hear they did a project for R1 billion, and we're still not producing jobs. So interestingly enough, we were approached by the CITAs now, and we're doing a study exactly on that. What skills are needed in the green sector? So evaluating what green jobs are being produced and what are our graduates learning on that. So in a sense, the awareness is there, But I agree with you, we need the localized skills, and we need the skills development. And I think it goes back to this: what are we doing at the TVET levels? What are we doing at the university levels? And is people aware of the opportunities that are there? Because sometimes also you hear that the money is there, some jobs are there, but the people looking for the jobs are not aware that they qualify for these jobs. And at the same time, we have a very complicated labor market in South Africa, that basically when you hire someone, you can fire them. So then when you see the job adverts, they need a graduate that is specialized in ABC with 7 years of experience, but they're looking for a graduate that is a 21-year-old that just came out of school. So, but it's all of these complexities that are not playing in our favor towards these youth employment in general, and the skills for the future. Yeah. So then the other question was on the transition and the policies. So the just energy transition is policies related to the energy, so energy base. That it does tie down to your sustainable development goals, it ties down to this Agenda 2030, etc. But this one is targeted directly off. So we do a lot of work on how does the just energy transition produces this double debitness. So we have to become more green and at the same time growth, GDP, employment, etc. So it's sort of like a sub-level of the national policies. That in South Africa, we have very nice policies on paper. It's the application that sometimes gets a bit lost in translation or lost in the corruption or in the implementation. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, the questions, let's start with Emmanuel first. If you could respond to the question that was addressed to you, and anything else you want to add, because we are coming to the end of the session. Thank you.
Good, I will be brief. I think this was a good question. It's something that I touched a bit. How do Africans really achieve green transition, given that they really need energy? I think the key lies on the models we opt for. And I gave an example of really making people part of this investment and not displacing them. And then really developing value additions. Why do we still sell raw materials while really we can buy those technologies, can produce locally, create jobs, and really get more income from that? Why don't you process electricity or car-based batteries in Zimbabwe if you have lithium, if you have all those that you need, rather than shipping all this there, even heavier? So I think we need to have those strategies in place. And then I think African countries really need to revise their policies and legal frameworks when it comes to these critical minerals that are needed. I remember there was time that people thought our former president, God bless him, Magufuli, he was very radical. He came with a Natural Wealth and Resources Permanent Sovereignty Act in 2017. And his vision was very clear. The state, the people of Tanzania must have a paramount and protected interest when it comes to agreements, when it comes to extraction of minerals that are critical for their own development. It's the time that we sit down and reflect that we need energy sources that we can protect, and technologies and the cost of renewables are dropping every day, folks. Solar panels are becoming cheaper and cheaper every day. And I think if universities, and thanks for the colleague from South Africa, I believe, who gave these disparities on our investments in technologies, in engineers. I think some countries are waking up. I remember this year, Tanzania sent a very good number of students studying critical science, AI-related topics so that they can come back and harness those talents locally and help the people. Yeah, let me stop there. I think it's an amazing discussions which we can take further.
Thank you very, very much, Emmanuel. And Bonnie, to you, last but not least, tough questions as well.
Yeah, very tough. I think the first question really, how do we translate, climate change awareness to action? It is a very good question. Maybe one that cannot be answered using the available data from Afrobarometer. Certainly, I think there are opportunities there to explore this and see if we can add additional questions on the module of climate change to see if we can address that question. However, I wanted also to say that I think when we have data like this, it's an opportunity as an entry point. When citizens are aware, it might also mean that they might be more willing to, to take action. So we can use data like this, maybe CSOs, governments, to go and engage and bring on board the citizens who are already aware to say, okay, what is the next step? Because as the question rightly observed, it's not enough just to be aware of climate change. What's more important is what kind of action are we taking as citizens, as individuals, to address, I think, this problem. As I did highlight, of course, there are already some suggestions in there that citizens do realize that there are ways that they themselves can play a role in mitigating climate change. I recall, I think, doing a similar study some years back where we're trying to ask people, and I think the questions, the way they were being framed, to be honest, was that the researchers had perhaps the agenda or the understanding that, well, people, Malawians, as ordinary citizens, will be blaming the developed world. And I think a number of them said, no. Some of these we are the ones who are responsible for causing this. The challenge for us is what are the alternatives for us? If we have cut down trees from the mountains, we know, I think, when we get flooding and muddy slides, that is because we've cut down the trees. But what other alternatives do we have so that we don't don't take action on things that could create problems for us? So there's, I think, opportunities there to explore. But I think the fact that already citizens are aware, I think, is an important step. And then the next step is to see what kind of actions can be taken by these citizens. To Dan, let me start by correcting you, Dan, that since the last time we met, I've lost the title of the tall man from Zomba, and I've lost it to someone in my own household. But the question on what can it take to get investors to come and invest in the renewable energy sector in Malawi? I think that obviously we do have the sun, like most African countries do. So I think there's, and of course the market is there, as I said, because only less than 20% of households in Malawi are connected to the electricity grid, and even that 20% doesn't have regular and consistent power. So the market is there, but of course, Malawi also, as Dan and others, I'm sure in the room are aware, we also have our share of problems, and maybe more problems than others that make us, I think, a less attractive investment destination. I think we are rated as the number 10 African country in terms of the ease of doing business by the World Bank. So we're not, I think, we are quite open to doing business, but the challenges that we face include, for example, the foreign currency situation in Malawi at the moment, with a foreign currency regime that's controlled, and that's caused a lot of challenges for businesses who would want to externalize profits. For example, that's been a consistent problem. We have problems at the moment, ongoing problems, fuel shortages, petrol shortages, made worse, of course, by the war in Iran. But we can't also just blame our petrol shortages to that war, because these are problems that have been there even before the war, and also the government bureaucracy. And I think government really needs also to demonstrate that they are very willing to go the extra mile to attract investors, so to reduce the amount, I think, of bureaucracy in terms of even registering a business, getting connected to electricity, among others. So I think this could be some of the ways that the government could and should indeed be taking to attract, investors, especially those that would wish to invest in the renewable energy sector. Thank you.
So thank you all very, very much. I'm looking at my watch and it's sad that we have to stop here now. But I want us to just give each other a round of applause, and to our panelists, thank you very, very much. That was a great session. So if we can just give everybody a round of applause. And now I hand over to our tall leader to take us to the next steps.
Okay. Thank you very much, Colleen and colleagues, for this session. I had to remind myself about the time because the conversation was so interesting. I'm going to ask Dan just to say closing remarks, and then I will tell you what we need to do. So Dan, some closing remarks in 1 minute. Now.
Well, now Manu's taking revenge and has put me on the spot because I wasn't expected to do this. But I can say that on behalf of my ambassador who had to leave, I'm very pleased that she was here for both the sessions. And thank you to both of you for moderating these sessions so effectively. And I'm so pleased that it was quality that mattered, and we had quantity and quality. We had quantity up there online. And I think there are so many things. One of the things that I would like us to continue with is continuity. Let's do the next session that we do here at Future Africa should, as you suggested, Manu, build on what we've learned today. And so that we don't start from scratch. And I think it would be lovely to have a series of conversations. And one of the many things I really like today is that this is not just a South African discourse. We've had Tanzanian perspectives, Malawian perspectives, many other perspectives, Kenyan perspectives. And I think we are, as part of this call, really trying to promote a Pan-African perspective on these issues. So it's not just a Southern African perspective. So thank you very much. It has been a joy for me. It's not often that I'm as quiet as I've been in this session. I usually tend to talk a lot more than I should, but today it's been wonderful to learn from you and to hear about these wonderful, wonderful African voices that are not shy, that don't have the imposter syndrome, but are actually speaking up, and with conviction and with a lot of self-confidence. So thank you very much. This is very promising. I can't wait for the next event.
Thank you very much, Dan. Colleagues, we're closing this session, or shall we say we pause here until we continue next time.